I mean, if we don't manage these toxic thoughts and memories from previous relationships that have hurt us or caused us harm or frustration, and sometimes when we end a relationship, it can be devastating. It can take years to recover sometimes. If we don't learn to heal these toxic thoughts,
you carry that into the relationship.
Is it possible to create a healthy relationship in the next one?
Yes, it is. So the thing,
if we don't heal these thoughts, it's possible.
No, not if we don't heal them. They're always going to stick. Sorry, I didn't listen properly.
Yeah. So is it if we don't heal these toxic thoughts from previous relationship, is it possible to have a healthy relationship in the future if we don't heal them?
No. That's
really?
It's going to affect us.
So the person isn't going to change in front of us, the next person, and be better than the previous?
We've got to change ourselves. We've got to change ourselves, because what will happen is if we don't heal that, we're going to always look for that. We're going to externalize this, and we're going to be looking for the lack that this has created in that person. And because it's not their issue, it's yours, they're never going to satisfy that. So you're going to go from relationship to relationship looking for something that's missing in you.
Wow.
So you have to change your relationship with yourself before you can change your relationship with someone else. So you're not going to fix everything before a relationship, because there's certain triggers in a relationship
that you have to process and go through. Yeah.
They'll be triggered. Mac and I have been married 35 years, and we're still working through things. And then we realize, hey, that's actually coming from, just the other day we talked, that issue has actually come from like way back when. That's something that, in his childhood, that kind of clash with, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So we didn't heal everything before we got married, but we healed a lot before we got married. And that, so the biggest issues that we will, obviously, the most obvious ones you'll work on first. But a lot of people don't even want to work on those. And a lot of people's coping mechanism is one of, you know what, it's not me, that's the problem.
Right, it's the other person.
Or they say, I need that from that person, and I'm looking for that from that person. So that's why I say that if you go into a relationship like that, it's not going to work. It's going to be a very challenging, it may last, but it's never going to, you may even get married. You may even find that you stay married, but at some point things crash. And
but it may not be healthy.
That's the thing.
It may be toxic.
Exactly. And then if you have kids along the way, they get
more stressful.
It's stressful. And
so why, you mentioned this in the beginning, that why do we attract certain people? You were saying like we attract someone that might have something broken inside of them so we can bring harmony or balance? What were you saying?
So basically it's humanity, or the way we are, because of a wired for love nature in the mind, brain and body. When something is off, we drawn to that to restore balance. So that's why very often you'll see, you may recognize your brokenness, which is one of the comments you made, in someone else, and that could draw you to them. Or it could be that you just see something that you didn't really experience, but it could have triggered something or didn't trigger something. But just the mere fact that you're human, there's a desire to help. That's what people go in. That's what people look at. What you've done with your life. You help people.
Right.
One of your biggest features about you as a person is you have a desire to constantly help others. And that's very authentic and very real. And people see that very clearly in you.
But when it happens, here's the interesting thing. You hear this in, sometimes you hear women who will try to find a guy who maybe has a deficiency or is broken or something's off, right? And they see the potential. And they're like, okay, I want to go help this person overcome this challenge or this pain or this struggle and fix them. And they struggle for that guy to change or transform or heal or grow. Or when they do transform, then there's nothing else to fix, or they try to reinvent new problems to fix in them. So what happens when a woman who is not healed finds a healthy man, a man who's working on himself, who wants to grow, who's doing it independently, but doesn't need like all this fixing? Why is she unable to be okay and happy in a healthy relationship?
Because there's brokenness in her, and what she's trying to fix is herself, externalizing it. And you'll see that male to female, you'll see it in male to male relationship, female to female relationship, whatever.
Really?
In any kind of relationship, it's not just a male to female thing, female to male thing. It's also in any kind of gender relationship. So it's the unique person. So first we must look at the person, see ourselves as a unique human being, and then we look at what our gender is, and that's really important, because otherwise we're going to have this unconsciously have this sort of sexist thing that it's done in one side or another kind of thing. And it's very, I'm not contradicting what you're saying. I totally agree. It could be a female to whatever.
Both, it's all, yeah.
So essentially, this brokenness is the first question that you made. We can be attracted to, and it's not the law of attraction. We are not talking about that. Absolutely not. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. That's a whole different story and a whole different, very unscientific story too. But there's elements of truth in everything. What we're talking about here is the essence of what I have missing in my relationship. I need to either I see in someone else and want to fix, or I want to, because I'm trying to fix
what
my
I have
own
missing in my relationship to myself.
Yes.
I need to find in someone else that I can fix.
Yes. And there's two key things over there. Is instead of me fixing myself, I try and fix someone else. And you can't fix anyone else. The only person you can fix is yourself. All we can do is support other people.
That's when it gets even more challenging in relationships, when you're constantly trying to change someone. You're constantly trying to fix them or change them. I just feel like that's where a lot of stress and chaos happens. It's conflict because you're not accepting them.
Exactly.
You're not choosing them based on acceptance.
Exactly. I can give you an example.
Yes.
I can give you an example of a relationship of people that have been married for quite a few years. And the male, I'm not obviously mentioning names, I'm going to protect people's identity, but the male, the husband in the relationship used to get incredibly irritated with his wife and switch off, and found her just demanding and always like nagging, and this, they had just kind of got into this pattern of, very unhealthy, and it got to the point where kids are out of home and all that kind of thing, and this person is basically at a point where, this is like, do I carry on with this, which is very often what happens.
Right, after the kids are gone.
Yeah, then you realize that, and this person started doing the neurocycle. I mean, they started working through this process and started initially very skeptical and basically the neurocycle is just mind management. It's the scientific way that you get your messy mind to listen to your wise mind to change your neuroplasticity. So it's mind-driven neuroplasticity. So it's the science of how do I find how I'm showing up and how can I change that, which is your question you asked right in the beginning. Can we change this, or do we have to live with all of this? Yes, we can change it. So that person, that husband, lived with that relationship for years, but you don't have to live for however 40, 50 years of marriage. It was long that they were in. You don't have to live with it. You can train your kids to start looking at these things in yourself so that you can become healthy and pick up things quickly and change them. Long story short, after a period of initially being very skeptical, suddenly a connection was made around about 3 weeks into the process of, oh, I'm actually blocking off to my wife, and she is just trying to get me to connect with her. That's what sounds like the nagging. And me seeing her as just wanting everything to be perfect all the time and finding that really irritating is actually triggering my poor relationship with my dad.
Wow.
And my dad was one who required complete and utter perfectionism.
Oh my gosh.
And used to constantly go. So as soon as what sounded
when someone's
similar,
nagging me or criticizing me,
I shut off, I protect, coping mechanism. And the realization has transformed and saved a marriage. I mean, I've left a lot of detail out, but that's the essence of the story.
Sure.
So there's an incident of years of this growing. There's the initial incident as a child growing up, with a parent that loved the child, but had a way of dealing that made that child feel not good enough.
How much does our love as adults in relationships reflect based on what we witnessed our parents love like as kids?
Huge, Lewis.
Really?
It's really huge. Having said that, if you didn't witness a good relationship, it doesn't mean you can't have one. But it does mean you're going to have to overcome a lot of obstacles, and that is definitely...
It's harder.
It's harder. It's definitely harder because it generally leads to a lot of mistrust. And
as an adult in relationships.
Exactly. Yeah. And what very often happens is that when you've seen that you haven't had a good model, you don't get into deep enough relationships, and then you can get hurt very easily, or you kind of end up maybe sort of almost using people without even consciously using people, and you meet people that are also broken, so you use each other, so it creates a lot of distrust and sort of fear and lack of commitment, and you look for any things will trigger you much more quickly and that kind of thing. So it's really important to You know what I always say when it comes to parenting, because I'm a parent of 4 kids, as you know, and all 4 work with us, which is quite a miracle too, which is amazing if you think of it. But I always tell my kids this: I was someone's daughter, and I have a mom and a dad, and they were someone's daughter and son, and each person had baggage. So you cannot go into a marriage, a relationship, and parenting without baggage. We know that. It's logical. So you've got all this come down, and it's in these networks, and it plays out and it's triggered. And whatever isn't resolved will be triggered badly. And whatever is resolved, well, you'll handle it. You'll see, oh, I could be like that, but I'm like this. Or my mom did that, but I'm not going to do that. And so in other words, that's where you've worked through something. So what we need to do as daughters and sons going into relationships is to say, okay, I honor what my parents went through. They maybe didn't have a great relationship. I don't know the ins and outs. It's not really a child's responsibility to know all the intimate details of why a marriage broke down. To certain, there's a certain amount that they should know and a certain amount that they shouldn't know, and recognize that, sometimes things don't work out, and to honor these stories, but at the same time, you have the right to honor the impact it had on your life.
Right.
So it's to so it's not
there could be good impact and bad impact at the same time. Yeah. You can hold both in your hands.
You can hold both in your hands at the same time.
Yeah.
And very often what will either happen is you'll swing to suppressing the negative because you feel you've been disloyal to a parent or to the parents.
Really?
So yeah, and very often happens. So you'll almost suppress it for years. And
act like what it didn't happen or wasn't that bad, or...
Yes, that it wasn't... You deny it, you diminish, you suppress, and you don't deal. And then suddenly something will trigger you one day. And this happened with the conversation that I had with someone working in clinical practice, where very successful person, parents went through a very traumatic marriage, and the one parent said way too much to the children.
Yeah,
and there's got to be boundaries. There's got to be an amount that you do say, because otherwise the child will think it's their fault. That's another thing we need to realize. Children will immediately, if there's a broken marriage, a child will think it's their fault, that they're the cause. So it is important to say, hey, listen, this is not you, this is between us.
If someone watching or listening has parents who have been divorced, whether it was traumatic or not traumatic as a child with their relationship, watching the relationship, but they went through divorce, what are the percentages, or how does that indicate how successful you will be in a marriage or in a relationship if you don't learn to create new healthy meaning around their model of love and relationship and their divorce, and if you don't heal and process that? Like, what are we setting ourselves up for if we're not aware of it, and make sure we really work on these things if our parents have been divorced?
You see yourself up for failure. And the reason I say that, and it sounds really harsh, but the other flip side of the coin is that once you do deal with it, you're setting yourself up for success. And that power is in your hands. And that's really why it's so important that we don't suppress stuff, because suppressing stuff, not only is it keeping the toxicity and increasing your vulnerability to disease, so physically you're suffering, and you will suffer more and more over time, because it's your natural wife love nature is being challenged, so your survival's being challenged, so your body's trying to fight this thing. But at the same time, you are going to kind of boomerang from one bad relationship into the next because you haven't dealt with the core issue. But once you start dealing with it, the beauty of you can have, look at this example, the first example I gave, you can have a 50-year marriage and 50 years of a toxic pattern that really was problematic, and you can heal that and have the last however many years you've got left in a very healthy relationship. So the hope, Lewis, is in the fact that we can change, but there is work involved. There is no pill that's going to fix it. There is the work involved.
What happens to the brain then when we see our parents that have harmony at home, they hold hands, they kiss, they dance, they love each other, they show affection, versus what happens in the brain when we see distance, passive-aggressive energy between our parents, yelling, screaming, slamming of doors, no affection between each other as a model? What happens to the brain with those two instances?
Such a good question. So basically, observing your parents as a child, that's you're modeling that relationship. So your relationships that's your model. So you're wiring that in. So you're wiring in the fighting, the slammed doors, the silent treatment, the moaning, the upset, the crying, the tears, the confusion, the closed doors and all the noises and sounds, and maybe it even gets to the point where there's abuse. So that becomes you build that into your brain, and your whole thing is we can't trust people. I can't trust someone else. I can't build a relationship. This is not safe.
Is it I can't trust people in intimacy and in romantic relationships, or I can't trust friends, colleagues?
It could bleed over into it, depending on how bad, depending on how you see it, depending on your perception, depending on the age, depending on the context, depending on how you're involved. All those factors will influence how it's going to play out into your future. And so it could, some people it will just mean that it's everything. They just live a life of completely and that, sorry, just quickly, I know you got a question.
No, go ahead.
A lot of narcissistic type behavior, if you track back, it's complete distrust of all people.
Wow.
And I'm not condoning it because it's very destructive behavior patterns that people really suffer from. But it's trying to control the uncontrollable that they have. So very often, if you track back, you'll see that there's been a model that has been very bad at some point. And they may, on the outside, their upbringing may have looked perfect, like they may have had money and good schools and
put together and dressed well, and
yes, but the inside wasn't, them as a person wasn't validated. The ability to, hey, I came home, I was bullied today, I'm sad. They weren't allowed to process emotions. So their coping mechanism was one of, I'm going to control people. I don't trust anyone, so I am going to run the shots here, run the show, and that's can lead to narcissistic type behavior.
Wow.
So that's just a side note.
And is there a certain attachment styles that we will have in relationships based on the model we witness from our parents?
For sure. So attachment styles research has been done in a very limited, with a limited group of people, but its applicability is pretty good. And so if you look in different cultures, it's quite interesting to see that most cultures where you've got sort of more solid relationships, it's not the child's brought up by the community, so it's not just the mom and dad, it's the whole community.
Really?
So in the United States and westernized countries, it's very much,
isolated between parents, and that's it.
Not enough of the supportive brand. And sometimes it's just if it's a way that we've gone in this country and in a lot of ways, which is unfortunate because you do get a healthier model when you've got more balance. So if parents need alone time, they can get it more because you've got the granny and the family and you've got the community. So a lot of pressure on parents that leads to arguments that could have been probably resolved if they had a bit more time alone, and the child maybe wouldn't have missed as much. So we have got society now that needs, if we need to look at our societal structures, our work structures and that kind of thing, that put that kind of pressure on families. That's definitely putting pressure that are in a pressure cooker, that people are living in a little bit of a pressure cooker, which I think is leading to problems in relationships that probably wouldn't have been there if they had more of a community.
Right.
So in terms of how, there's so many questions going through my head now. So to bring us back to your question.
The attachment styles was current one.
Styles. So in the community, we're going to have a slightly more balanced attachment style versus if it's just
if we're raised by a community or aunts and uncles and friends.
It's more realistic. It's more like, okay, they're arguing again, give them some time, let me go sit with granny.
Because we're not needing the love and affection from one person. Is that right? Or
we get it from a community, but if you're in this very isolated, insular type environment, where does the parent explode safely?
There's no safe environment for a child.
Exactly. There's no safe environment. There's no safe environment for the parents. So, and you are going to explode. It's very normal to have those arguments. So that's the ideal. It's not what's happening. So what do we do now? How do we deal with that? You have to be honest with your kids. You have to, and what Mac and I tried this, and we got it right and we got it wrong, but we got it right, I think, a lot of the time, was we do have very different opinions about a lot of things. And both of us are Italian and background and explosive. So we did have arguments. I mean, much as, it's easy when kids are around and the pressures of raising kids and working.
Yeah, 4 kids, that's a lot.
It's a lot. And both of us working and whatever, it's a lot. And we moved countries with young kids. And so, but what we did right, we did a lot wrong, but what we did right was if we had an argument, we would never just leave it. We would go to the kids, we would apologize. We would we gave them permission to tell us when we were upsetting them. So they would say, hey, listen, can you just stop? You know you're going to make up. Can you just resolve this? Or mom, really this, or dad, that. We gave them permission to actually, like from an outside point of view, saying, hey, you are impacting us. This is really upsetting us.
Interesting.
And this is, and reminding us that, hey, you do, like, okay, so let me go back a step. If you have an argument, you need to tell your kids, okay, we had an argument about X, obviously language, age appropriate, and also within boundaries. They don't need all the details.
Yes.
We had an argument, we disagreed on this. I didn't like Dad's reaction. Dad didn't like my reaction. I did this, it bugged him. He did this, it bugged me. This is how we resolved it, and this is what we're going to do. That's a neurocycle. We went through all 5 steps of the neurocycle. Once we cool down and calm down and we use the neurocycle individually on ourselves and then on each other, then we would, and I didn't call it the neurocycle then because that's a new name, but that process we applied, and it was a God-saving thing. It was a life-saving thing in our marriage because it helped us to stand back, calm down, evaluate, what am I really fighting about? What is, take memento mori concept. What happens if both of us are dead tomorrow, or one of us is dead? What would we do right now? And so we would resolve it. And, we would let our kids know we're still trying to resolve it. So there may still be a bit of argument or whatever, but this is where we're going. This is our resolution. We still love each other. Kids need that. Even an adult child needs that. If there's an argument, if Mac and I have an argument now, we still do it. We'll still say, hey, we love each other. Dad irritated me about this. Sorry about that. Sorry. We tell them. So that's what we can do in our insular environments that we live in this day and age. We can go through that process of modeling to a child, listen, it's normal to have arguments. We have bad days. We are a mess. No one's perfect. We're not perfect. We do not expect you to be perfect. But let's talk about, it's a horrible argument. I'm so sorry. We should not have yelled. It was scary for you. Tell us how you feel. Get it out. And go through the sequence. Don't just blurb it all out. Be ordered. The big thing, nurse, about healing in a relationship to have healthy future relationships is not just get the kids to talk about emotions or mix it all up. Very organized. Let's talk about, this is how I felt. This is what my emotion was. This is what I said. This is what I did. 4 categories of signals. Very organized. I'm going to talk about how we felt, our emotions, our behaviors, our bodily sensations, and our perspective. So essentially, when people get sucked in and then they get down the rabbit hole of the negative toxicity and really get caught up, what happens is that your brain will merge with your environment. And your brain is driven by your mind. So where your mind drives your brain and where you keep the focus, that's what your brain will merge with. So where people stay